So this talk isn't explicitly about fair data, and in some ways it explicitly isn't about open data, but it is about the increasing real share of all of the data that are collected about us as citizens today. I'm here this afternoon with our project manager, Sarah Shepherd, who's sitting there in the second row. And what we're talking about this afternoon is the Consumer Data Research Centre, which is an ESRC big data centre concerned, as I say, with the increasing real share of predominantly social science data that's collected about each of us as citizens today, which is collected not by government or administration, but in our everyday transactions with machines. And so this is really about trying to reuse and harness the value of the digital traces that each of us leaves about our lives, and to harness that for the social good. And in terms of the social good, this is just a slide which I put up with, I'm a geographer, as was said by introduction. And this is a slide from, I think it appeared in the third edition of a textbook that over the years has paid a fair bit of my mortgages. And it shows an area of northeast Glasgow and the 8-mile trajectory that links Corton to Lenzie, which World Health Organization report in 2009, I think, led by Sir Michael Marmot of UCL, revealed had those two locations, if you just discern the start and the end point of the 8-mile trajectory that's identified there, those two locations had a greater difference in life expectancy than the country of the United States and the country of India, basically. So you're talking about a very short distance and a more than 12-year difference in life expectancy. And the trouble with geographers are very nice, palatable, sort of individuals, but the end point of a lot of this sort of analysis is, well, I wish I knew where I was going to die. Why? Because I wouldn't go there. It doesn't say much about sort of the underlying dynamics, process, and so forth. And a lot of the motivation for the Consumer Data Research Centre is to try to use new sources and new forms of data to cast new light on these wicked questions that seem to have perpetuated through the generations. And it's not only the more difficult questions, which would be set by issues of multi-causality, equifinality, and so on and so forth, but it's even simple questions. This quote from Joe Twyman of YouGov really just reflects that even simple questions like predicting the outcome of referenda, general elections, and so forth, somehow, despite having all of these data available to us and at our disposal, there's a sense of the receding horizon, and we're unsure whether there are malevolent forces behind elections, or whether basically we're using multiple data sources, multiple research methods, and we're just incapable of getting the right answer. So, what Sarah's job is in the Consumer Data Research Centre is to try to answer those questions by negotiating access under terms which I'll describe briefly in a moment, with a wide range of private sector and quasi-private sector organisations that, as I say, together account for the dominant share of the data that are collected about us as citizens from day to day. And you see from this slide there are one or two logos that you'll recognise. There are some which are holding companies. There are some at the bottom which prefer not to be named on our website, although they are named when the data sets that we, specifically Sarah, helps acquire from the private sector are made available to researchers to actually access the sorts of organisations that are behind the store loyalty cards, the credit cards, those sorts of things, the things that we carry around in our bags and wallets every day. And those data, of course, are different because few, if any, consumer organisations have a monopoly of the provision of any goods and services. And so in a way, this is the only slide left from the textbook, which is basically just showing the principles underlying sound sample designs in social and environmental science, where basically every element from a known sample frame has a known and pre-specified chance of selection. And that world has really drifted away from the current generation of young researchers and social scientists. And it's a shame it's drifted away, but there are reasons, there are some reasons, push and pull factors for that. In some ways, large-scale public sector surveys are becoming increasingly unreliable. I don't know how many online internet surveys you've declined to participate in the last 7 days. I've probably turned down three or four. And we see that mirrored in the response rates to conventional public sector surveys, which, as you can see in this slide, over a 10-year period has shown a 10 percentage point decrease in participation. And so it no longer makes sense to actually talk of even public sector surveys as inferring from samples which have a known and pre-specified chance of selection, because the source and operation of response bias is increasingly uncertain. But if it's uncertain, it's certainly not nihilistic. And what you can see in this map, this is a map of people who consent to having their georeferenced tweets published, made openly available. Okay, it's a pretty map, but what is it? Is it a map of residence? Is it a map of workplace? Is it a map of the journey to work? You can see some transport corridors outlined there. Probably the only honest inference to draw from that is it's a geography of middle-class, middle-aged narcissism. A subset of people who are prepared to do it, and they're predominantly middle-aged, they're predominantly male, etc., etc. So that's the picture then. That's the picture. We have to get on the big data bandwagon, because the safety net that we think of conventional social surveys isn't perhaps as safe as perhaps we would have liked to have thought. And if we can get on that bandwagon, and if we can persuade organisations not just to silo their data, and very interestingly, David's talk and JISC and so forth about data preservation, private sector organisations, they're interested in the next quarter's profit forecasts. They're not interested in data preservation, custodianship, metadata, all those honourable things that they talk about, and face them with GDPR, they'll just press the delete button, because then everything's safe, which is like saying, any book without a 2018 date in the front of it should just be burnt as a precaution. And so data vandalism is taking place on a colossal scale, and that's something else that we really need to come to terms with. If we can come to terms with it, basically, a lot of my colleagues in geography are still tremendously excited by the 2011 census, because that was the date of the last census, and I don't know how many people in this room can remember where they slept on the 20th of April 2011, but probably each of us are rather different people now than we were then. And so if we can exploit these data sources, we can find out more about what's actually going on. But how do we actually do that? Well, and again, this is my sort of lifeline to talking about data that are fair or open. I was listening to a programme on Radio 4 last week, and they say, it was about nationalism, and they're saying, nationalism, it always starts with folk dancing and ends with barbed wire. Well, fair and open data, in our experience, sort of may start talking about sort of fair access and so forth, but it often ends up in cages. And this is our cage in UCL, our secure data lab. which is Metropolitan Police accredited. It's not connected to the external world. It's got nothing to do with Raspberry Pis and discs you can fit into your pocket. But it's the only terms under which some data providers are prepared to share their data, because they don't want, another cool credit scandal, Marks and Spencer's scandal, nationwide scandal. Every time another scandal comes out, I lose more hair, and Sarah's turns a different colour. So it's and so there are questions of access on what terms and at what cost. Moreover, although sample designs are in many respects a thing of the past, if ever they were a thing of the present, but that's really another story. The point I've made about consumer data, the fact that you don't have all that there is, you only have a market niche or a self-selecting subset of a self-selecting subset, means that you need much more to devote much more efforts to what David was saying in the GISC presentation about metadata, provenance, and so forth. And how do you do that? The Nigel Shadbolt, sort of point, response to that would be, you have to have a system which has many open platforms. And you can think of ONS as having, Office for National Statistics, as having an open platform because they make data available against which you can get some idea about the provenance of the data that you're looking at, perhaps by saying pretend it's thought experiment, pretend it's 2011, then add a bit, take away something. But you can actually link, you can actually anchor new consumer big data sources to some kind of reality. So if you travel almost due west from here, you actually pass 3 of our footfall sensors in High Holborn, okay, and this is one example of one of the projects that we're involved in, again with a private sector partner. We've got about 1,000 footfall sensors the length and breadth of the country, and these are the footfall measures that you get from locations A, B and C. On this diagram, we've averaged those 3, which is the diagram, the line that goes up and goes down at the bottom, but we've benchmark them against TfL's platform, which is the known volume of egress from High Holborn tube station in the morning and ingress to High Holborn tube station in the afternoon. And so from this you begin to build up a picture of a city not as a sort of carcass of built form, but as a nexus of flows and interactions, which is quite important, and it's important to have something to benchmark it to. My eyesight's absolutely awful. And we've really made this point already. Big data are very useful, they're very rich, they're very frequently updated, they often tell us lots of things that we can't get from other sources, but it's important to think of them as exhaust. They're a byproduct of our transactions with machines, but with customer-facing organisations. Those tweets were a byproduct of the use of a social media service. They weren't created for the edification of researchers, and so there's a lot of research work to be done on linkage and attempting to triangulate these sources. So these are just a couple of examples in no particular order. Store loyalty card data. I don't know. I've never met anyone that's updated their Nectar card, address, and neither would I wish to. You've got that much time on your hands. So this is not Nectar card data, but store loyalty card data from another high street retailer, and you can see from the map on the left. There are people. Basically, what the message of the people, the map on the left, is that there are people in Aberdeen who say they live in Aberdeen, but they're making all their transactions in Maidstone. And the diagram on the right is actually what sort of a researcher has done in terms of cleaning up the data. And so a lot of data exchange is based on commonalities of interest, because the high street retailer is interested in this sort of stuff, and we're interested in this sort of stuff, because when you come to think about issues such as urban deprivation is not just a static state, it's a dynamic process. It's about who's out and about, who really does have limited horizons, not just socially but geographically. And so there's a commonality of interest, the data gets shared, the research project takes off. This is another one from Bristol, domestic energy provider, one of the big six energy providers, and cluster analysis of the time profiles of smart meters. Again, so that sort of you can see who's out and about, and the domestic energy provider begins to get an idea of the way the energy market might be going, sort of in an era, for example, of electric cars or whatever. So a lot of these sort of things are established issues of social concern. Other issues that come out of using new sources of data actually encourage serendipity, actually sort of thinking about new issues. Here we've got frequency, so it counts up the y-axis, and this is the most deprived output area, small area in the United Kingdom, and this is the most affluent. They've just been binned, okay? So there's a variable which we can only reveal from consumer data, or we've only been able to reveal from consumer data, that explains why one distribution has a strong negative skew and the other has a strong positive skew. And I heard what you said about timekeeping. I'm not, if this was a lecture, so, we sort of, we'd stare each other out until someone came up with a hypothesis. Time's not on our side. The answer to the question is surname. Unbelievably, these are both Anglo-Saxon surnames. And if your name's Walcott, you're probably poor. If your name's Offer, you're probably rich. And that actually relates to a lot of very interesting work that's going on in economic history about the intergenerational transfer of wealth, which postulates that you can do what you like with social policy. Sort of some families, will just pass on opportunity and others won't. So all we've got to do, the only way out is massive, sort of taxation or whatever. But the geography perspective that sort of underpins this, if you actually look, many names have a geographic origin, okay? So this is not consumer data, this is the 1881 census. And the geography of the name Blair determines the geography of the life chances that most people called Blair still have. And the geography of the Thatchers determines the life chances that most people called Thatcher have as well. So you've got a sense of big data here opening up a use of consumer data, opening up the sorts of hypotheses and ideas that could only be speculated upon, and this actually is data-led findings. Using credit card data, you can actually look at the age profile of the Tonys and the Margarets. Okay, and then going back, most of the Margarets are pushing up daisies, aren't they? But you can use that, and so going back to the georeferenced tweets. And so here we've got georeferenced tweets in four London venues. And so what we've done is, from the Twitter handle, we've inferred the name, sort of we've inferred how far from home they probably are, and how old they probably are. And so what you can see here, this is the age pyramid of the nighttime population in London according to the census, and you can see how far away from that those habituating those four locales are compared to that baseline. Another big data problem, once you've got consumer registers, and we've got consumer registers and electoral registers, which is another sort of form of consumer data defined broadly. And once you start doing text searches on names, we've got a 20-year period, you can trace where Paul Longley was in 1998, and you can trace where he's moved to over the following 20 years. And so, again, this is another example of what you see here are quintiles of deprivation, sort of, very disadvantaged to the very advantaged. And you get some idea of residential mobility trajectories and actually begin to put some flesh on the bones of questions of social mobility that arguably have not been addressed by conventional sample surveys, the sorts of surveys that, again, I talked about people notifying Nectar of change of addresses. I don't know anyone who's been part of a panel survey for 20 years. I wouldn't have had the patience. And again, sort of this issue of the source and operation of bias is important. Here's another one, okay? A name is a statement, arguably of your social origins, but it's arguably a statement of your ethnicity. And so, big data classification. On the left, you can see the geography of people who describe themselves as Bangladeshi in the 2011 census. Using contemporaneous data, you can look at the geography of people who describe themselves as Bangladeshi using consumer registers. They're broadly similar. In other cases, you can unpack more. This is the geography of people who describe themselves as white other in the 2011 census. White other includes Poles, French, Greeks, Spanish, etc., etc. The sort of names classification that we're able to do from consumer registers allows you to say not just whether someone's white other, but whether they're Greek. So, anyone ever been to a Greek restaurant in Thetford? No, I thought not. That's where there's no Greeks up there, but there's plenty of white others. So these are just sort of some examples, and as I say, Sarah has more details of the other sort of data holdings that we have. And these are some of the sort of summary indicators that that really are the future, I think, of very much of what social science, big data analysis is becoming. But is it entirely fair? Is it completely open? No, it's not. It's based on commonalities of interest, it's based on shared goals, and it's also based on research approvals practices that have to screen out competitor interests in everyone's interest in furthering a competitive economy, if you like. And so it's how to establish commonalities of interest. And so the sorts of things we've done is classify retail areas. When's a shop inside or outside a retail area? Depends on footfall, depends on lots of things. Healthy areas. We did a talk for when David Willits was present. I think this is his constituency, which is why it's Portsmouth and Havana. So this is access to to healthy assets and hazards. Summary measure, which can be broken down in terms of access to rather bad things like fast food outlets or gambling machines, but access to good facilities like leisure facilities or whatever that is, I can't read it, GP surgeries. You can shuffle lots of things together as well to look at the geography of internet usage, not only speeds of access, but who uses the internet a lot and who doesn't. So which is increasingly as much a social divide as patterns of physical behaviour. So there's lots of consumer data sources that go into that. This one is really a consolidation of our indices. So basically, when you slam together consumer and electoral registers for every year from 1998 to 2018, what is residential churn in different areas? Well, the census can tell you every 10 years, okay? And so we won't know what's happened until 2021. But what you can see here for Bristol is looking at the rate of residential churn, and so you pick up a much more dynamic picture, more dynamic portrait of what's actually going on. And I mentioned a name being a statement of your ethnicity. This brief animation just shows over the same 20-year period changes in the Indian population. I think the next one's quite relevant to this neck of the woods, so-called Bangladeshi enclaves, and you see the way that Bangladeshi community is moved eastward from Tower Hamlets, for example, and then another, I think it would next go on to the black African population. Again, data that are available at highly disaggregate scales from consumer data sources, but which are not available, just from official sources at this level of granularity. So I hope I've hauled us a little bit closer to time, but really the abiding message from this, as I say, is that consumer data account for an increasing real share of the data that collected about us as citizens every day. These issues of fair and open access, I think, to be honest, if you look in terms of ESRC initiatives, we've done very well if you compare us to Research Council funded endeavours to get data out of government. I think we've got a lot more out of private sector organisations because of there's a movement, very much a movement in the United States of data philanthropy, and many organisations outside the internet behemoths of Apple, Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft and Facebook. Those are data companies that are very much keeping things to themselves. But the sorts of organisations that I showed you in the slides are motivated by the common good, but the future of this sort of data analysis is not open because data have to be made available under the particular terms and costs. And I think that's worth bearing in mind in our conception of what fair data are. So those are some of our data products. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
That's all right, don't worry. Is there a general trend in business as far as you can tell towards either holding your data or being more public with people in general?
Well, you see, that's a very profound question. Data are arguably the world's greatest resource, but there's no open market for them. So, is Tesla a car company or a data company? And were they to contribute their data for the public and the social good, under what terms and costs would they do it? And so there is as yet no unequivocal answer, because amongst the retailers that we deal with, some are bordering on some are philanthropic, others are grudging, others can be pursued, and others just say no.
Sorry, just to follow up, but is there anything that you've seen that encourages them to be more open with data, even if they're, so for example, I took the example, we have something that's called a ladder of engagements. We start off doing collaborative masters projects with students, then try and graduate to PhDs, then sort of fully fledged projects. An example from the store loyalty card data was all the addresses are wrong. Okay, the company said they're wasting a lot of money on postage. We're solving a geographic problem about who's out and about, who's got limited horizons and who isn't. We're giving them back the data, which allows them to print out till reminders. So next time you use it, you get a till reminder, you get 50 points or 200 points for updating your address. So that would be an example. Yeah, but they're one-offs. Okay.
I think I'd say. Thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
So thank you. That was a really interesting talk, and I think my kind of reflection on it is that this is a very complex landscape, and we shouldn't make assumptions about the principles underlie access to data at all times from all sources, and that we need to somehow have a system which accommodates the different sources of data in different ways, rather than saying, we might, as academics say, these are the principles that we think all data from all sources, government, consumers, you know, stuff that researchers create, so whatever source. These are the principles under which we all think that all researchers, all citizens, all researchers, you know, should have access. But actually, you've illustrated how that it's a lot more complicated than that.
No, I think that's spot on.
And so we need a kind of ecology, we need some framework, obviously we need principles, but then how those are ever going to be made to apply. So it depends what for me, it depends what's our ultimate objective here.
Yes, but I think the message, I agree with almost everything you said, but with the caveat, yes, I mean, the answer is one size doesn't fit all. Yeah.
So we might like to think that we're all working towards a common kind of principled landscape within which we can work, but actually showing us that that's
Thank you.
maybe not true.
Someone just beyond
Sorry, there's one here first.
My question basically links your talk with one of the previous ones. You mentioned OMS being an open platform. So the question is how much you find it difficult to approach administrative governmental data.
Right. Something's just exploded in the row in front of you. I think that might give you part of the answer.
Because, for example, OMS is an example, is one example.
Yes.
The London Data Store is quite another.
Yes.
It's a huge platform of information.
Yeah.
Making reports on a weekly basis.
Yes. I think I'd speak up here. I'd speak up for the ONS in actual fact. I mean, basically, a lot of this going back to my picture of the cage. You know, a lot of people say, okay, you know, you can get access, but only in these ways. And so the Secure Research Service that ONS is sort of pushing forward, you know, there is an attempt to actually reuse official surveys to wring the last bit of value out of them. But the problem is, you know, going back to the talk about 60 papers have been published during this during this talk. During this talk, probably 30 gigabytes of consumer data have been irrevocably and irretrievably deleted. Because it's more trouble than it's worth, which was again GISC point. It's more trouble than it's worth. GDPR compliance, it's very easy. You delete it. I'm worried I'm making you late again. I thought I was being good.
I only wanted to just agree with what the colleague over there was saying, so I don't remember your name. It was that I think everything that we were trying to say from our task force was you can't do one size fits all. You've got to look at the complexity of the landscape, and yes, that you can have a principle, but what you actually do in practice is going to vary enormously.
But there was another very good point before T, which goes back to the sustainability. So how much are you prepared to top slice? How much are you prepared to pay for that?
Exactly.
How sustainable is this model? And so these are questions not just of ethics and availability, but also of access.
Okay, thank you
very much.